Well, welcome to week 8, week in review for the 3025 season. It has been quite a while since we had one of these. We had several minor delays and one or two larger delays over the course of the last several weeks, real time, before we finally completed week 8. But it is complete, and I finally got around to doing the recap video. Apologies where needed for the large numbers of delays. But having said all that, let's get into it and talk about some of the things that have happened in this second to last week of regular season competition. There we go. So, first off, we have our current standings. The American Industrialists remain at the top with a good 14-point lead over the next two contenders. Those next two contenders are, of course, tied at 76, the Debutantes and the Golden Suns. Both teams sitting at, one team at 6 wins and 2 losses, the other team at 5 wins and 1 loss, 1 draw. We also, I forgot to update something on the Dragonborn, but they are now at 6 wins and 2 losses, having moved down 2 positions from second place last week. Canopian Honeybees and the Cyan Spirits still sitting at, no changes there, still at 5th and 6th place respectively. Dover Crows have jumped up 3 positions by a slim margin over the bottom 3 in the standings. They do sit at the top of the bottom 4, which will be the 4 teams competing in the preliminary phase for the postseason, assuming, of course, none of this changes once week 9 is completed. And we'll be talking in a moment about what week 9 is going to look like. But first, let's get through the rest of this. We've had some movement, not a lot of movement, but the standings are getting shaken up a little bit. Let's talk about kills. At the top of the teams in the kills, we've got the Debutantes and the Industrialists tied at 17 kills each, followed then by the Dragonborn with 15, the Golden Suns with 11, and so on, as you can see here. What's interesting to note is that Zhao of the Industrialists is leading for individual kills with 9 kills this season. Clift and Vamsey tying for 8, and then we've got a bit of a gap, and it gets a little bit more muddled the lower down we go. And this is, of course, of the players that have not yet been drafted. Some players that were drafted did have some really good numbers, but they were drafted because, of course, recognized as better players for other competing teams. One other thing of note, Vamsey is out for the season, with Vamsey being injured so severely during their match against the Golden Suns this week. Vamsey will not be returning until the 30-26 season, which will not be played. It will be some random dice rolls to determine the outcome of that season, because the next season that we play will be the 30-29 season. At any rate, with Vamsey being out for the Dragonborn are now looking at basically their second string players. They've got some experience, they got some capability, but they are not the top 3 or 4 players that the Dragonborn started with at the beginning of the season and gradually have lost over the last several weeks for draft. Wealth and growth, something that we've been paying attention to just to make sure that all teams are having a fair chance, financially speaking. The Industrialists remain at the top with over 121 wealth growth or profit, whatever you want to call it, since the beginning of the season. Debutantes holding pretty strong with a solid 88 wealth growth, and this is, of course, for the Debutantes, this is after they have completed their stadium purchases and renovations, which, as you can see here, 2 new teams have gained stadiums, that being the Industrialists and the Dragonborn. Those are all now in effect as of the end of week 8. So week 9, we will have 4 teams, the Industrialists, the Debutantes, the Golden Suns, and the Dragonborn, all having stadiums, and we'll see what that looks like for the remainder of this season, and what that will look like in the next season to come. Lastly, in the drafting, the Golden Suns jumped up. They lost like 2 pilots and a tech. I think they rolled 2 pilots and 2 techs, but one of their techs managed to evade the draft. They are now sitting at the top with 9 total players having been drafted away from their team. The Spirits and Industrialists are sitting really close with 8 each, as well as the Honeybees with 7, and then the numbers get lower and lower. And yet we still have the Dover Crows sitting with exactly none of their players being lost because of the draft. Let's talk about individual matches, individual teams. First up, we have the Canopian Honeybees, currently sitting at 4 wins and 4 losses. They took on the Lyon Debutantes this week, a match that came down to basically a mismatching of skill and a downturn of luck. It was a good match to watch, but nonetheless, the Debutantes came out on top, and the Honeybees had to take another loss this week. Tappan Golden Suns, 6 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. They went on to face the Luthien Dragonborn this week, and frankly, this match, this was the match of the season. A lot of lead up in it, lots of animosity, rivalry, contention between the two teams. But this was quite the match, and it was a very explosive match. In the end, the Suns did come out on top, even with Countess Skylar Hawk-Davian herself, quote-unquote, contributing to the team's win. Dover Crows, 3 wins and 5 losses. They took on the Rock City Wolverines, and frankly, the Wolverines just couldn't get a break here. The Crows are now back into the fight with something to prove as they move into the final round, and they look at changing their final win-loss record to 4 wins. But we'll see how that turns out after this week. Luthien Dragonborn, 6 wins, 2 losses. This was absolutely a match. We just talked about this a second ago. This was a great match to watch. Unfortunately, the King Crab took the brunt of the losses, blowing out both torsos, losing all of its weapons, and its pilot taking a significant number of hits. It was 5 out of 6 possible hits. That 6th hit would have killed the pilot. And once the Crab went down, with the way the rest of that match was going out, it was not looking good for the Dragonborn. It was a great match to watch. If you haven't seen it, you should take a look at it. Lots of good action in that one. Lyon Debutantes, 6 wins, 2 losses. They took on the Canopian Honeybees this week, and let me tell you, I don't know, if you look at it from a role-playing perspective, it's definitely the new management coming in. If you look at it from out-of-character perspective, Grimdark James coming in and just really turning this team around from what it was before. Of course, before it was just an NPC team, but James came in and they've really made this team a powerful contender, slowly making their way up the ranks, and they're currently sitting, I believe it was at 2nd place, right alongside the Golden Suns. So definitely a team to keep an eye on as we move through the rest of the season. American Industrialists holding it on their own at the top ever since week 3. This week they took on the Torian Nationals. This match was basically called before the mechs even powered up, but the two teams did show up and they did fight. Of course, the Merrics won this match, and they have maintained their leadership in the standings. Vermor in opposition, now at 3 wins and 5 losses. Frankly, there seems to be something of a rivalry going on between the Spirits and the opposition. Every time you look for one, you see the other not far behind. So definitely some sort of rivalry going on here. But in this outing, things just did not go well for the opposition, and they had to take the L to the Spirits. Rock City Wolverines, let's be honest, as much as I like this team, and as much as I like to play them up because I really put some cool little hidden Easter eggs and things like that in the team, this team is just much like the team upon which they were initially based. They're not long for this world. I'll put it that way. For as well liked as they are, this team just doesn't seem like they've got it. They don't have it cut. They don't have the cut to make it through this league. So we'll see how much longer they last. I want to bring them back in 30-29, but I think based on stats alone, that would be a misuse of resources. Cyan Spirits, again, right up there neck and neck all season long against the opposition. Surprisingly entertaining match to watch, but the opposition just wasn't, well, the opposition that they thought they would be against the Spirits. Spirits win this match, and they are now sitting at 3 wins and 5 losses. Lastly, I think that's the last team, the Torian Nationals, 2 wins and 6 losses. They went up against the American Industrialists, and of course, when you're facing a top-tier team, you need to give it your all. Unfortunately for the Nationals, it just wasn't enough, point blank. They just didn't really stand much of a chance. Looking at the standings and where people would fall on the brackets if we were to start the tournament now, our first 2 matches of the preliminaries would feature the Dover Crows taking on the Torian Nationals and the Rock City Wolverines taking on the Remoran opposition. Not a lot of shuffling back and forth here. A couple of things moved. Of course, the Crows went from 10 to 7, so that just changes one thing, and then one of the other teams moved around a little bit. So things do get bumped up a little bit, but doesn't really change the dynamics a whole lot. We'll still be looking at, right now, again, if this was a snapshot that went live, we'd be looking at the American Industrialists facing either the Crows or the Nationals, the Debutantes facing either the Wolverines or the opposition, and then the Golden Suns versus the Spirits, the Dragonborn versus the Honeybees to round out the quarterfinal phase. But of course, we've got to know a whole nother week of regular season competition before we get there. So let's see how that goes before we start making our draws. Speaking of week 8, that should say week 9's matches. Week 9's matches. Moving ahead, we've got the Davion Golden Suns hosting the Canopian Honeybees, our only player versus player match of the week. That'll be an interesting one to watch, and we'll talk about that in just a second or two. We've got the Wolverines taking on the Dragonborn. We already know what my prediction is going to say, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Debutantes sitting at roughly number 2, taking on the number 1 American Industrialists. That's going to be a match to watch. That will definitely be me versus Grimdark James, and that's just going to be an interesting match. James is, of course, a great player, and I'd like to think I'm a decent player myself, but the Industrialists, of course, have their advanced mechs, and the Debutantes have their advanced management in the form of Grimdark James. So we'll see how that one turns out. We've got the Dover Crows taking on the Cyan Spirits. The two teams locked in the same win-loss record, so we'll see how that turns out. One of them is going to be slightly better, and one of them is going to be slightly less after this week. And then lastly, we have the Taurian Nationals taking on the Romoran opposition. That will be an NPC game that I will be streaming live on Twitch, date to be determined, but that will be coming eventually. Let's talk about Olaf's predictions. Of course, I'm Omar, and I play Olaf, but if I were Olaf, these are the words I would say. For the Golden Suns and the Honeybees, following their huge win over the Dragonborn, watch for the Suns to get cocky and then lose their footing to the ever tricky to manage and difficult to predict Honeybees. I think the Honeybees will pull this off. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, there's a part of me that's saying that mostly to troll Bowhammer, because I do that every opportunity I get. I think this will be an interesting match to watch, and I really do think the Honeybees can get it. And frankly, that's the team I want to win. Not because I don't like Bowhammer. He's fun. He's fun to hang out with and whatnot. I gotta troll him when I can. Wolverines versus Dragonborn. Do we even need to talk about this one? The Dragonborn odds are like 10-1 at least. Okay, let's call it 8-1 after they lost some of their good players. Debutantes versus Industrialists. This is definitely going to be a tough match to call. I obviously want the Industrialists to win, and frankly, it's because the Industrialists I've always viewed as my team. When we first started this whole GTL thing, the Industrialists was my team in spirit, if not in all actuality, because as the game master, I play all the teams. But ultimately, I want to call the Indies on this one, but don't be surprised when the Debs walk away with the W. The Crows versus the Spirits. I'm putting my Kroner on the Crows, and not because of the alliteration and similar sounds there, but also because Talus can be a crafty, sneaky, and wholly unpredictable bastard once the shooting starts. This is the same guy that dropped the mech behind a hill just to hide it, to come up the next round and pulled off some weird, crazy shit, and then pulled off some crazy flanking encirclement thing in like week 1 or 2 that had me completely stunned that he managed to do. And I still don't know if he did it intentionally or not. We're just going to assume he did. The Spirits might have a chance, but right now my needle is leaning towards the Crow side of the gauge. And then lastly, the Nationals versus the Opposition. Kind of a tough call, but I think the Opposition has it in the end. The Nationals, they briefly had their moment, but they really haven't been able to get anywhere from that, and they've just kind of been muddling about in the background. Since we're done talking about predictions, let's talk about Week 9's Melee round and the special rules that are going into this. I've given this some thought. There's been some pushback. I don't know if pushback's really the right word. Definitely some feedback on the Melee round and how it might not be the best way to handle things, and how am I going to handle the NPC match. We do have the Nationals versus the Nationals versus the Opposition, and how do you get the bot to only do it? So I think my workaround for the player-involved matches, the one PvP, and then the rest are player versus NPC. This is how it's gonna go. And then of course for the two NPC teams playing each other, I'm just gonna have to get creative. I don't know exactly. I know there's a couple of ways I could do it. I could effectively play both teams against myself, because you can connect to your own computer as a direct connect. So I might do it like that, but then it doesn't really. It's still me in the match, but we'll see how that works out when the time comes. At any rate, all matches will take place on a single 10 by 10 generated map. For those owning a stadium and hosting a match, you'll use a single 16 by 17 or 17 by 16, whatever the standard map size is. You'll use one of them from your standard deck of 6 map sheets. Any mech normally loaded for ammo must begin the match with its full ammo load. Dumping ammo is permitted at the beginning of round 2. And I want to clarify, I said round 2 intentionally. You have to spend that first full round moving around. So if you take a hit, it's a possibility. But come round 2, that's when you can start dumping ammo. So you'll have to think ahead. Melee is, of course, the name of the game. Move towards your opponent and literally pummel them into submission. And for each mech your team defeats via melee attack, an additional 3 points is awarded to the victory point total at the end of the match. So theoretically, depending on the points involved, you could win the match according to Megamech, but still lose the match based on overall points at the end. If your mech fires a weapon attack, all bonus victory points are surrendered, but the match results stand. NPC teams will randomly determine if and when they'll begin firing their weapons unless they are fired on first. I am allowing some weapons fire to take place if you choose to. You negate any bonus points you could earn. If you still win, you still win. If you lose, you lose. And the NPC teams basically won't fire unless they're fired on, or the random factor is the random condition is met. I guess it's basically I'm going to roll a die every round, and if I roll over a certain number, that's when they get to start shooting. Whether or not they actually shoot from that point is a different story. Lastly, if the match is determined to be a victory for your team and you fired 0 weapons, you will receive a bonus 10 points to your team's cumulative victory points, potentially affecting your standings for the end of the regular season and where in the championship brackets your team begins. Now, I want to be clear, because I know my viewers are probably watching this and this is going to come up in conversation at some point. These 10 bonus points do not affect your score in the match. They are added to the number of points added to your standings score, for lack of a better thing to call it. So if you win the match, let's say 10-2, and that's with whatever other bonuses, the +3 you get for every melee kill, you end up with 10-2. You won the match. You've never fired a weapon. When I go to input your points that determines your standings, whether you're number 1, number 2, number 3 in the league, you will go from that 10 to having an additional 10 put on. It does not affect your score in the match. It also does not affect payment, does not affect the wealth breakdown or anything like that. This is just strictly an extra 10 points added to your cumulative victory points, not the victory points that go into your pool. Hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, if you have questions, by all means, DM me on Discord and let's get it figured out. Lastly, I put this little snarky comment in here because I kind of intended, once I sat here and figured out how to do the melee round, let's make it a little bit of a backstabby, backhandy kind of round. All teams ostensibly are going into the match to conduct strictly melee actions, but as we all know, sometimes tempers get hot, or sometimes you've got a great opportunity for a wonderful backshot with a heavy-hitting weapon, and you really want to win because the match is not going in your favor. Blast that motherfucker in the back. Yes, I use that big MF word. Blast that dude in the back and take the win. You're just going to lose the bonus points you could have gotten. But yes, that's what I'm doing for the melee round. When it comes to the 2 NPC teams, I'll try to follow something close to that as best as I can, or as close as I can, but we'll see what happens after that. And I do believe that is my final slide. That is my final slide. Look at that. We're back at the title screen. All right, my friends, that is what we have. So coming in the next week, we'll start getting our next matches scheduled for week 9. One last thing for my viewers, and especially for my players, because I'm going to have to remind them, this is the completion of week 8, which means now you can spend experience points on all your players and pilots that are not... Wait. Even if they're on the injured list, you can still spend the points, but if they're on their injured list, they can't come into play until they've completed healing. which I think at this point right now really only applies to one who is out for the season regardless. Of course, they won't gain any more points while they're still in recovery. So, but yeah, spending experience points. It's the melee round, so maybe spending something on a melee SPA is not a bad idea. But I leave that to the coaches to figure out. I've got 5 teams to figure out how to spend their points. So best of luck. And in the meantime, my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this little recap. I hope you've enjoyed the season so far. We are moving to the close of the season, and we will have only one more season after 3025. That will be the 3029 season, and we will be celebrating is not the right word, but we will be remembering or referencing the 4th succession war that began in 3028 in the Battletech time. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to get out of here. Make sure you do what you got to do to take care of you and yours, because this world is indeed a strange and dark, crazy place. And as for me and mine, we're out of here. We will catch you next time. Have a good one, my friends.